The old Victorian in Brookline had never looked more festive than on that Christmas morning. I parked my Subaru between a Mercedes and a BMW, the contrast not lost on me as I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror one last time. The cranberry tart balanced perfectly in my grandmother's ceramic dish, still warm from the oven. 3 years of marriage to Daniel, and I was still trying to earn my place at Margaret Sullivan's Christmas table. The walk up those familiar stone steps felt heavier than usual. Through the bay windows, I could see the family already gathered. Daniel's sister Rebecca holding court by the fireplace, his brother Thomas pouring what was likely his third scotch despite it being barely noon. The 12-foot Douglas fir dominated the living room, adorned with the same Waterford crystal ornaments Margaret had collected since the 70s. I smoothed down my navy dress. The one Daniel said made me look respectable. And rang. The doorbell, the brass knocker, caught the winter sun as footsteps approached from inside. Margaret opened the door herself, unusual since she typically had Thomas or Rebecca handle such tasks. She wore her signature pearls and that burgundy cashmere sweater I'd seen at every holiday gathering. "Claire," she said, my name hanging in, the air like an accusation. No smile, no greeting, just that practiced look of polite distance she'd perfected over the years. Behind her, the sounds of Bing Crosby mixed with laughter and clinking glasses. "Merry Christmas, Margaret. I brought the cranberry tart you asked for." I lifted the dish slightly, hoping to break through her wall of formality. She didn't move, aside. Instead, she squared her shoulders in a way that made my stomach drop. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. Today is for family only." The words hit me like ice water. I stood there, snow beginning to dust my shoulders, trying to process what she'd said. The tart suddenly felt impossibly heavy. "But I am family," I whispered, hating how small my voice sounded. "Daniel and I—" "Daniel is inside with his family," she interrupted, emphasizing the word in a way that left no room for interpretation. "Perhaps next year will be different." Through the window, I caught a glimpse of my husband, laughing at something his cousin Sarah had said. He hadn't even noticed I'd arrived. Or maybe he had, and chose not to intervene. After 3 years, I still couldn't tell which was worse. "I understand," I managed. Though understanding was the last thing I felt. My fingers were going numb through my leather gloves, but I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or the shock. Margaret's expression never wavered. She might have been declining a delivery, not turning away her son's wife on Christmas morning. "Drive safely, dear. The roads are getting slick." The door closed with a soft click that echoed louder than any slam could have. I stood there for a moment longer, watching the warm light spill out onto the porch, hearing the muffled joy of a celebration I'd never truly been part of. The walk back to my car stretched endlessly. Mrs. Peterson next door was setting up luminarias along her driveway and waved cheerfully. I waved back, my smile automatic and hollow. The cranberry tart found its way to the passenger seat, where it would remain untouched for the 20-minute drive back to our empty condo in Cambridge. I didn't let the tears come until I passed the Starbucks on Commonwealth Avenue, the one where Daniel and I had our first date 4 years ago. He'd been so different then, eager to show me off to his family, promising they'd love me as much as he did. Back when I believed love was enough to bridge any gap, overcome any tradition. By the time I reached home, the tart had cooled completely. I set it on the kitchen counter and stared at it. This perfect dessert made from Margaret's own mother's recipe, now destined for the garbage disposal. The condo felt cavernous without the anticipation of the day I'd planned. The small pile of wrapped presents by the door, a silk scarf for Rebecca, vintage cufflinks for Thomas, that first edition Fitzgerald for Margaret, mocked me with their careful ribbons and thoughtful cards. I poured myself a glass of the expensive Pinot Noir we'd been saving for a special occasion and settled onto the couch. Outside, Boston glittered with holiday cheer, families gathering in warm homes, sharing meals and making memories. Inside, I sat alone with my wine and my questions, wondering when exactly I'd become the stranger my mother-in-law saw at her door. Nobody knew about the Tuesday morning I sat in the back office of Sullivan and Associates, Daniel's law firm, quietly writing a check for $50,000. The practice had been hemorrhaging money after losing their biggest client, and Thomas's cocaine habit had finally caught up with the family finances. I'd liquidated part of my inheritance from Aunt Helen to keep them afloat, making it look like a miraculous new investor had appeared just in time. The family never questioned their good fortune. Margaret simply assumed her connections in Boston society had finally paid off. Daniel thought his networking at the Harvard Club had done the trick. Even Thomas, despite being the firm's CFO, never dug deep enough to discover the shell company I'd created to funnel the money through. They celebrated their salvation over champagne at the Ritz-Carlton, while I sat home, reviewing the bank statements that showed just how close they'd come to bankruptcy. That wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. When Rebecca's daughter, Emma, needed specialized therapy after her autism diagnosis, I quietly arranged for the bills to be covered through a grant from a foundation that existed only on paper. $24,000 over 18 months. And Rebecca still tells people how blessed they were to find such generous support. Margaret's house in Brookline, that beautiful Victorian she was so proud of, would have been foreclosed on 2 winters ago if I hadn't stepped in. The adjustable rate mortgage she'd foolishly refinanced during the housing boom had ballooned, beyond her pension's reach. I created another phantom benefactor, this time a distant cousin's estate, that conveniently left funds designated for property tax and mortgage assistance. Every Christmas, Easter, and Thanksgiving, I'd arrive bearing gifts that seemed modest: a bottle of wine, fresh flowers, maybe homemade preserves. What they didn't see were the January credit card bills I intercepted and paid, the medical debts I negotiated down and settled, the college fund contributions that appeared to come from dividend reinvestments, but actually came from my salary as a financial advisor. I never wanted recognition. Growing up in a working-class family in Worcester, watching my mother clean houses for women like Margaret, I understood the power of dignity. I knew what it meant to struggle silently, to maintain appearances while everything crumbled behind closed doors. When I married Daniel, I thought I was joining a stable, successful family. Instead, I discovered a house of cards held together by reputation and denial. The irony wasn't lost on me. Margaret, who never missed an opportunity to mention her Mayflower ancestry or her Smith College education, was being kept afloat by the daughter of a seamstress and a factory worker. The same woman who forgot to invite me to the annual Sullivan family reunion was living in a house I'd saved from the bank. Daniel knew some of it. He had to. We shared bank accounts after all. But he had a remarkable ability to avoid uncomfortable truths, especially when they involved his family's finances. When I mentioned helping with his mother's mortgage, he'd simply nodded and changed the subject to the Red Sox chances that season. When I covered Thomas's rehab costs, Daniel treated it like a joint decision we'd never actually discussed. I kept meticulous records in a safety deposit box at a bank across town, not for leverage or revenge, but for my own sanity. Spreadsheets documenting every transfer, every payment, every crisis averted. Nearly $300,000 over 3 years, not counting the smaller everyday expenses, the grocery deliveries during Margaret's hip recovery, the car repairs for Rebecca's minivan, the anonymous donation to Thomas's kids' private school fundraiser. The night after Margaret turned me away from Christmas dinner, I sat in my home office and pulled up those spreadsheets. Line by line, I reviewed the entries. March 2021, $5,000. Emergency dental surgery for Thomas June. 2021, $15,000. Rebecca's mortgage after Patrick lost his job. September 2021, $8,500. Margaret's property taxes. December 2021, $12,000. Sullivan and Associates quarterly tax payment. February 2022, $45,000. Firm refinancing package. May 2022, $6,700. Emma's therapy uncovered expenses. August 2022, $25,000. Thomas's business trip, rehab. November 2022, $11,200, holiday bonuses for firm employees. January 2023, $18,000, credit card consolidation for Margaret April. 2023, $9,500, Rebecca's medical procedures. July 2023, $22,000, Brookline property tax increase October. 2023, $14,000, Thomas's legal fees, and those were just the major expenses. The smaller ones, the utility bills paid during computer glitches, the insurance premiums covered during administrative delays, the tuition checks that arrived just when scholarship deadlines had passed, they added up to even more. I closed the laptop and poured another glass of wine. Through the window, I could see the Prudential Center lit up in red and green. Somewhere in Brookline, my husband was probably deep into his third helping of Margaret's famous Christmas pudding, listening to the same stories about their grandfather the senator, their connections to the Kennedys, their legacy in Boston society. Meanwhile, their actual legacy, the one that kept them in cashmere and country clubs, sat alone in a Cambridge condo, invisible as always. The wine was gone by midnight, but sleep wouldn't come. I lay in our king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling fan Daniel had insisted on installing last summer. Round and round it went, like my thoughts, like the cycle I'd trapped myself in. Margaret's words echoed in the darkness. Only family is welcome today. I grabbed my laptop and headed to the kitchen, the hardwood floors cold under my bare feet. The cranberry tart still sat on the counter, a monument to my foolishness. I pushed it aside and opened my computer, fingers moving with sudden purpose across the keyboard. Bank of America, Citizens Bank, Chase, Fidelity. One by one, I logged into the accounts I'd set up to manage the Sullivan family's secret safety net. The shell companies, Beacon Hill Holdings, Commonwealth Ventures, Harbor Trust Associates, all waiting for my monthly instructions. But not tonight. Tonight, I had different instructions. The first cancellation was the automatic transfer, scheduled for January 1st, Margaret's property tax payment of $9,200. I hesitated for a moment, then clicked Cancel Scheduled Transaction. My hands were surprisingly steady. Next came the utility bills. For 2 years, I'd been paying the electricity and gas for both Margaret's house and the Sullivan and Associates office through an elaborate automatic payment system that made it appear the bills were covered by a legacy family account. National Grid, Eversource, all canceled. The internet and phone bills followed. Then the firm's quarterly tax installment due in 2 weeks. Rebecca's car insurance would lapse on January 15th without the automatic payment I'd set up. Thomas's kids' tuition for spring semester at Exeter and Milton Academy, both scheduled transfers deleted. The monthly payment to Emma's behavioral therapy center, disguised as insurance coverage, terminated. I worked methodically, like I was performing surgery. Cut here, sever there, cauterize the wound. Each cancellation felt like snipping an invisible thread that had bound me to a family that didn't want me. The irony was perfect. They didn't know these threads existed, so they wouldn't feel them being cut. Not immediately. The house was tomb quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a plow scraping down Massachusetts Avenue. I made myself a cup of tea and continued working. The business credit line I'd personally guaranteed for Sullivan and Associates, I drafted the email to the bank requesting its immediate closure. The emergency fund I'd established for the firm's payroll shortfalls transferred back to my personal account. By 3 a.m. it was done. Every automatic payment canceled, every standing order terminated, every safety net quietly removed. I closed the laptop and sat back, waiting to feel something. Guilt, maybe. Vindication, anger. Instead, there was only a strange lightness, like I'd been carrying invisible weights and had finally set them down. Daniel wouldn't be home until tomorrow afternoon. The Sullivan family tradition was to spend the night at Margaret's after Christmas dinner, gathering around the piano for carols, sharing brandy and stories until the early hours. He'd texted around 11, a brief, "Miss you. Mom says hi," That felt more like salt in the wound than comfort. I wandered into my office and pulled out the safety deposit box key from its hiding place behind the Jane Austen collection Daniel had bought me for our first anniversary. Tomorrow. No, today, I realized, glancing at the clock. I'd go to the bank and retrieve those records. Not to destroy them, but to keep them safe. Evidence of who I'd been to them. Even if they never knew. The sunrise was beginning to paint the Charles River in shades of pink and gold when exhaustion finally hit. I crawled back into bed, still wearing yesterday's dress, and closed my eyes. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't set an alarm. There was no rushed morning routine to maintain, no careful makeup application for a mother-in-law's approval, no gifts to wrap, or dinners to cook for people who saw me as an outsider. My phone buzzed with another text from Daniel. Driving Mom to church. See you this afternoon. Love you. I turned the phone face down and pulled the comforter over my head. Love. Such a simple word for such a complicated thing. I loved Daniel, or at least I loved the man I'd thought he was. But love without respect, love without acknowledgement, love without basic inclusion, what was that worth? The Christmas tree in our living room stood dark, its lights on a timer that wouldn't activate until evening. Underneath were the wrapped presents I'd bought for the Sullivan family, each one carefully chosen, each card written with hope that this year would be different. Now they seemed like props in a play where I'd been cast as an extra, forever hovering at the edges of the main action. I dozed fitfully, dreaming of bank statements and mortgage documents, of Margaret's house with a foreclosure notice on the door, of Thomas trying to explain to his children why they couldn't return to their private schools. When I woke, the room was full of pale winter light, and I knew with absolute clarity that I'd done the right thing. They wanted me to be invisible? I'd give them exactly what they asked for, every trace of my financial presence in their lives, the silent support, the crisis interventions, the dignity-preserving gifts, would vanish like I had from their Christmas celebration. They could keep their traditions, their bloodlines, their closed doors. I got up, showered, and dressed in jeans and a sweater, clothes I'd never wear to a Sullivan family function. The day stretched ahead, empty of obligations for the first time in years. No careful conversations to navigate, no subtle slights to endure, no gratitude to manufacture for people who tolerated me at best. I made myself breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, nothing fancy, and ate it while watching the neighbors' children build a snowman in the courtyard below. Their laughter drifted up through the window, pure and uncomplicated. This was what family should sound like, I thought. Not the careful choreography of the Sullivan gatherings, but this simple joy. By the time Daniel's key turned in the lock that afternoon, I'd made my decision about more than just the money. But that conversation could wait. First, they needed to discover what my absence truly meant. December 27th came with a vengeance. I was having coffee and reading the Globe when Daniel's phone started buzzing on the kitchen counter. He'd left it behind in his rush to get to the office. Sullivan and Associates always open the day after Christmas, Margaret's way of proving their Protestant work ethic. The first text was from Rebecca. Emergency. Card declined at Whole Foods. Call me. Then Thomas. What the hell is going on with the firm accounts? Payroll is bouncing. Another from Rebecca. Daniel, I'm stranded at the gas station. All my cards are maxed. Can you send money? I sipped my coffee and turned to the art section. The Museum of Fine Arts was having a Monet exhibit. Maybe I'd go today. Daniel burst through the door at lunch, his face flushed from the cold and something else. Panic, maybe? He grabbed his phone without even taking off his coat, scrolling through the messages with growing alarm. Claire, something's wrong with the accounts. Mom's electricity got shut off this morning. In December, she's at Rebecca's now, but she's freaking out. I looked up from my laptop where I'd been browsing vacation destinations. Somewhere warm. Maybe the Turks and Caicos. That's terrible, I said calmly. Must be a billing error. He was already dialing, pacing our small kitchen like a caged animal. Mom? Yes, I got the messages. No, I don't know what's... Rebecca's cards too? But that doesn't make sense. I went back to my research. The Ritz-Carlton in Grand Cayman looked nice. All-inclusive. No surprise bills. The rest of the afternoon was a symphony of crisis. Daniel fielded calls from every corner of the Sullivan empire. The office internet had been disconnected. Thomas discovered that the firm's quarterly tax payment had bounced, triggering penalties and interest. Rebecca's husband, Patrick, called in a fury because their daughter's therapy center had just informed them their account was 3 months overdue. How is that possible? Daniel kept saying. There must be some mistake. These were all on auto pay. By evening, he'd set up a war room at our dining table. Bank statements, bills, and business documents spread across the surface like evidence at a crime scene. I made myself a salad and ate it in the living room, occasionally hearing his muttered curses and confused exclamations. Claire, he called out around 8. You understand this stuff. Can you look at something? I patted over, wineglass in hand. He showed me the Sullivan and Associates operating account statement. Look at this. We should have had an automatic transfer here on the 15th for $40,000. It's not there. And this payment for the business insurance, it just stopped. How does that happen? I studied the statement with professional interest. Automatic payments don't just stop themselves. Someone had to cancel them. But who? Mom doesn't even know these accounts exist. Thomas barely knows how to log into online banking. I shrugged and returned to the couch. On the TV, a reality show about wealthy housewives screamed at each other over perceived slights. It felt appropriate. The family group chat, which I'd been excluded from but could see on Daniel's phone when he left it unlocked, was pure chaos. Margaret, this is unacceptable. I've been a customer at Citizens Bank for 40 years. Thomas. Dad must have set up these payments. Maybe they expired when the estate closed? Rebecca. Patrick thinks we've been hacked. Should we call the FBI? Margaret again. Daniel, you need to fix this immediately. The next morning brought new disasters. Thomas called in a blind panic. 2 of the firm's biggest clients were threatening to leave because their trust accounts had been frozen due to the missed tax payments. Margaret received a notice that her property taxes were overdue, with additional penalties for late payment. Rebecca discovered that both kids' spring tuition payments had bounced, putting their enrollment in jeopardy. I spent the day at the Museum of Fine Arts, losing myself in the Impressionist collection. Monet's water lilies had never looked more peaceful. My phone stayed on silent, though I could see the missed calls piling up. 17 from Daniel, 3 from Thomas, even 1 from Margaret, which must have cost her significant pride. That evening, Daniel came home looking haggard. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his lucky power tie loosened and askew. He collapsed on the couch beside me, head in his hands. It's like someone pulled the plug on everything at once, he said. Mom had to borrow money from her bridge club friend just to get the power turned back on. The humiliation is killing her. I rubbed his back sympathetically. I'm sure you'll figure it out. Your family always lands on their feet. He looked at me strangely then, a flicker of something, suspicion, understanding, crossing his face. But it passed quickly, replaced by exhaustion. The worst part is, we were fine. Everything was always fine. The bills got paid, the firm stayed afloat, even when things were tight. It's like we had a guardian angel, and they just disappeared. I stood up, stretching. I'm going to take a bath. There's leftover Thai in the fridge if you're hungry. As I walked away, I heard him mutter, 26,000 in missed payments and penalties. Where the hell are we going to find 26,000? the bathtub filled with lavender-scented bubbles as I mentally calculated the compound interest on my newly recovered investments. $26,000 was nothing compared to what I'd poured into the Sullivan family over the years. They'd figure it out. They had connections, after all. Old Boston money. Someone would help. Just not me. Not anymore. December 29th arrived. Gray and sleeting. The kind of Boston winter day that seeps into your bones. I was organizing my closet, finally donating the conservative dresses I'd bought to win Margaret's approval, when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw my mother-in-law standing in the hallway, her usual perfect composure cracked around the edges. Her Burberry coat was spotted with sleet, and she clutched her purse like a life preserver. I let her wait 30 seconds before opening the door. Claire. My name came out strained like she was swallowing glass. May I come in? I stepped aside wordlessly, watching her survey our condo with the same evaluating gaze she'd used when Daniel first brought me to Brookline. The modern furniture, the abstract art, the absence of family portraits, all of it failing her. Invisible test, even now. She perched on the edge of our white leather sofa, her spine rigid with decades of finishing school posture. I sat across from her in the reading chair, waiting. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. There seems to be some confusion with our family finances, she finally began, her tone suggesting this was somehow a clerical error we could laugh about over tea. I tilted my head. Oh? Several automatic payments have mysteriously stopped. Daniel mentioned you have expertise in financial matters. I do. She waited for more. I didn't give it to her. The sleet tapped against the windows like nervous fingers. Well, she continued, visibly flustered. We're hoping you might help us understand what's happened. The timing is quite unfortunate with the holidays and all. I smiled, the kind of smile I'd learned from watching her all these years. Polite, empty, revealing nothing. I'm sure the banks can sort it out after New Year's. Her composure cracked a little more. Claire, I don't think you understand the severity. No, Margaret, I interrupted, surprising us both. I understand perfectly. Would you like some tea? She blinked at the non sequitur. No, thank you. We need to discuss the property taxes on the Brookline house, the $43,000 you owe in back payments and penalties, or maybe the business credit line that's about to default and take Sullivan and Associates with it. The color drained from her face. Her hands trembled slightly as she set her purse on the coffee table. How could you possibly know? Or we could discuss Rebecca's mortgage, 3 months behind now that the mysterious payments have stopped. Thomas's children's tuition. Did you know Exeter requires payment in full by January 10th, or they lose their spots? Claire, what are you saying? I stood, walking to the window where the city spread out gray and wet below us. I'm saying that I know exactly what's happening to your finances, Margaret. Every cent, every crisis, every carefully hidden struggle you've papered over with old money pretense. Behind me, I heard her sharp intake of breath. When I turned, she looked older somehow, the careful facade finally crumbling. It was you, she whispered. All this time, it was you. $378,000 over 3 years, I said conversationally. Not including the smaller amounts, the grocery deliveries, the medical copays, the emergency car repairs. Did you never wonder how the bills got paid when Thomas was in rehab? How Rebecca's mortgage stayed current when Patrick lost his job? How your beautiful, historic home avoided foreclosure? She shook her head slowly, like she was waking from a dream. But why? If you've been helping all this time, why stop now? I laughed, surprising myself with its bitterness. Really? You can't think of any reason why I might stop propping up a family that won't even let me through the door on Christmas. I didn't mean, only family is welcome. Those were your exact words. Well, Margaret, you got what you wanted. I'm officially not family. And non-family doesn't pay family bills. She stood abruptly, swaying slightly. For a moment, I thought she might faint. Instead, she straightened her spine with visible effort. This is blackmail. No, I corrected. Blackmail would be if I demanded something in return. I'm not demanding anything. I'm just done. Daniel knows. Oh, he doesn't know the details, but he knows I've been helping. He's known all along and chose to look the other way, just like he looked the other way when you shut the door in my face. She flinched at that. Good. What do you want? The question came out strangled, defeated. I returned to my chair, crossing my legs. Nothing. That's what you never understood, Margaret. I didn't help your family because I wanted something. I helped because I loved Daniel, because I thought I was part of something, because I believed in supporting family. But you taught me I'm not family. So now I'm just another stranger, and strangers don't write checks to cover your debts. She fumbled with her purse, pulling out her phone. I need to call Charles Whitman. He's been our family attorney for... Call whoever you like. There's nothing illegal about canceling voluntary financial support. Ask Charles about gift tax implications while you're at it. You might owe the IRS quite a bit, given the amounts involved. Her hand holding the phone trembled. You can't do this. The firm will collapse. Rebecca could lose her house. The children's education. All things you should have thought about. Before you decided I wasn't good enough to share your Christmas dinner, she sank back onto the couch, suddenly looking every one of her 72 years. I pride myself on being a good judge of character. How did I not see this? Because you never bothered to look. To you, I was just the girl from Worcester, who trapped your son, the daughter of a seamstress who didn't belong in your world. You were so busy guarding your gate, you never noticed who was keeping the lights on. The sleet had turned to snow, fat flakes drifting past the windows. Margaret sat in silence, processing the ruins of her careful world. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. What do I tell the family? I shrugged. Whatever you want. Tell them the truth. Tell them lies. It doesn't matter to me anymore. She stood slowly, gathering her things with shaky hands. At the door, she turned back one last time. I'm sorry, she said, the words seeming to physically pain her. I met her eyes steadily. No, you're not. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry there are consequences, but you're not sorry for how you treated me. And that's why this won't change. After she left, I poured myself a glass of the good scotch. The 25-year-old Macallan Daniel had been saving for a special occasion. The snow was falling harder now, blanketing the city in pristine white. My phone buzzed with texts. Daniel. Mom just called. We need to talk. Thomas. What did you say to my mother? She's hysterical. Rebecca. Claire, please call me. This is all a misunderstanding. I turned off the phone and settled back into my chair with my scotch and a book. Outside, Boston was transforming into a winter wonderland. Inside, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Spring came late to Boston that year. By Easter, the crocuses were finally pushing through the last stubborn patches of snow in the public garden. I walked there often now, my mornings, no longer consumed with managing the Sullivan family's secret finances. Our condo had been on the market since February. Daniel and I were separated, though not yet divorced. He'd moved back to Brookline to help his mother navigate what Margaret called the family's temporary difficulties. The irony wasn't lost on either of us that he was living in the house I'd saved from foreclosure. The divorce proceedings were remarkably civil. Daniel didn't contest anything. Perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of exhaustion. We'd started couples therapy in January, but it became clear that our marriage had been built on a foundation of assumptions and omissions. He'd assumed I'd always be there to cushion his family's falls. I'd assumed that love would eventually earn me a place at their table. "I don't blame you," he'd said during our last session. "I should have stood up to them. Should have insisted you were included. I never learned how to go against Mother." Dr. Martinez, our therapist, had nodded knowingly. Family patterns are powerful forces. Sometimes it takes a crisis to break them. The crisis was ongoing. Sullivan and Associates had downsized dramatically, moving from their prestigious State Street office to a modest space in Quincy. Thomas was gone. He'd taken a job with a competitor after the firm couldn't make payroll in February. Rebecca and Patrick had sold their Newton house and moved to a rental in Medford. The kids had finished the school year at Exeter and Milton, but public school waited in the fall. Margaret still lived in the Brookline house, though half the rooms were now closed off to save on heating. She'd sold the Monet sketch that had hung in the parlor, along with most of her jewelry. Pride, it turned out, was a luxury she could no longer afford. I knew all this not from Daniel, but from mutual acquaintances. Boston society was small and gossipy. The Sullivan family's fall from grace was the subject of whispered conversations at charity galas and country club luncheons. "Such a shame," people said. They seemed so established. My own life had taken unexpected turns. The apartment in Cambridge sold quickly to a young tech couple, netting enough profit to buy a small Victorian in Marblehead, overlooking the harbor. I'd left my position at the financial advisory firm and started my own practice, specializing in helping women navigate the complexities of divorce and financial independence. "You saved my life," Carolyn Henderson told me over coffee at my new office. She was one of my first clients, a Beacon Hill wife who'd discovered her husband's affairs and hidden debts. I had no idea where our money went each month. Now I have a budget, investments, even a retirement plan. Word spread. Soon I had more clients than I could handle. Women who'd been kept in the dark about their finances, who'd trusted too much and questioned too little. I helped them find their footing, claim their assets, build their futures. On a warm Thursday in May, I was reviewing portfolios when my assistant knocked. "Claire, there's someone here to see you. Says she's family." I looked up to find Daniel's cousin Emma standing in the doorway. I'd always liked Emma. She was the black sheep of the Sullivan clan, a public school teacher who'd married a carpenter. Margaret barely acknowledged her existence. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, clutching a coffee cup nervously. "Not at all. Come in." She settled into the client chair, looking around my office with interest. "This is nice. Very you. Professional but warm." "Thank you. What brings you by?" She smiled ruefully. "Would you believe me if I said I missed you? You were the only normal person at those family dinners." I laughed, surprising myself. I'm not sure I ever made it to enough dinners to be missed. "That's the thing." Emma leaned forward. "I wanted to apologize. For all of us. But especially for me. I saw how they treated you and I never said anything. I was too afraid of being shut out myself." "You don't need to apologize, Emma." "Yes, I do. When you stood up to them, God, Claire, you're my hero. Do you know what you did? You showed them that their money, their connections, their whole house of cards, none of it meant anything without actual human decency." We talked for an hour. She told me about the family's struggles, about Margaret's grudging acceptance of reality, about Daniel throwing himself into work to avoid dealing with the emotional cleanup. I told her about my practice, my house by the sea, my morning walks, on the beach. "Are you happy?" she asked as she prepared to leave. I considered the question. Yes, I think I am. For the first time in years, I'm living my own life. Could we stay in touch? Maybe grab dinner sometime? My husband would love to meet you properly. We could go somewhere Margaret would never set foot. Maybe that new Vietnamese place in Dorchester? I smiled. I'd like that. After she left, I stood at my window, looking out at the harbor. Sailboats bobbed at their moorings, and seagulls wheeled against the blue sky. My phone buzzed, a text from my sister in Worcester, confirming Sunday dinner at Mom's house. My real family, the one that had never needed my money to love me. That night, I drove to Marblehead and walked through my new home. The rooms were smaller than the Cambridge condo, but they felt more spacious somehow. I'd hung my grandmother's portraits in the living room, displayed my mother's china in the dining room hutch, things that had stayed boxed during my marriage, deemed too Worcester for the Sullivan aesthetic. On my desk sat a letter from Daniel's lawyer. The final divorce papers would be ready next week. I felt no sadness, only relief. We'd tried to build something on a foundation of sand, pretending love could overcome the fundamental inequality in how his family saw me. As I made dinner, a simple pasta with fresh herbs from my garden, I thought about family. Not the one we're born into or marry into, but the one we choose. Emma's visit had reminded me that connection wasn't about bloodlines or bank accounts. It was about showing up, speaking truth, refusing to be invisible. My doorbell rang just as I was plating my meal. Through the window, I saw my neighbor Joan holding a casserole dish. "Welcome wagon's a bit late," she laughed when I opened the door. "But better late than never. I'm Joan from next door. Figured you might be tired of unpacking." I invited her in, and we shared dinner at my kitchen table, talking about everything and nothing. She was a retired librarian, widowed 5 years, with opinions on everything from local politics to the best beaches for sea glass hunting. "Fair warning," she said as she prepared to leave. "This neighborhood's pretty nosy, but in a good way. We look out for each other." Standing in my doorway, watching her walk back to her house, I felt something settle in my chest. Home. Not the cold perfection of Brookline or the temporary compromise of Cambridge, but this quirky Victorian with its creaky floors and ocean views. My phone lit up with messages I didn't read. The Sullivans could sort out their own problems now. I had a new life to build, one where I was visible, valued, and whole. The girl from Worcester had finally found her place, and it had nothing to do with anyone's approval but her own. I locked the door and headed upstairs, already planning tomorrow's schedule. Morning walk on the beach, client meetings, lunch with a potential business partner. A life of my own choosing, supported by my own efforts, surrounded by people who saw me clearly. Outside, the lighthouse swept its beam across the dark water, steady and sure. I fell asleep to the sound of waves, against the shore, finally understanding that sometimes the greatest gift isn't being included. It's learning when to walk away.